Rain lashes the streets of Ashford Creek. Before dawn, smoke coils out of a small blue house where a mother is screaming for her child. At the edge of the firelight stands a quiet man no one notices anymore. A war veteran with 4 dogs and a past he doesn't talk about. No leashes, no sirens, just instinct. As flames crawl across the ceiling, one dog charges straight into the heat, another blocks falling debris, and the smallest one finds a path no human eye can see. One wrong breath, one wrong step, and none of them come back. But sometimes, God sends help without uniforms, and miracles arrive on 4 paws. What happens next will change a town that thought fear was safer than trust. Before we begin, tell me where you were watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child, no mother, and no animal should ever face danger alone, subscribe now and share this story with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Ashford Creek sat low between forested hills and a narrow river that flooded every few years, as if the land itself needed reminding that it was still alive. The town was small, practical, and shaped by weather more than ambition. Winters came early and stayed late. Summers were dry, brittle, and unforgiving. Even in spring, the air carried the faint scent of old smoke, pine sap mixed with something scorched long ago, never fully washed away. That morning was cold in a way that settled into bone. Fog lay thick over the streets, muting sound and swallowing distance. The sky held no color, only a dull gray weight pressing down on rooftops and telephone lines. Ashford Creek was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that existed because nothing had happened yet. Elias Whitmore stepped out of his cabin before dawn. The cabin stood at the edge of town, where asphalt gave way to dirt and trees leaned closer together. It was built square and solid, without ornament, its wood darkened by years of rain and wind. Elias closed the door behind him carefully, as if sound itself carried consequences. He was 58, tall, broad-shouldered, though age and old injuries had taken some of the ease from his posture. His movements were still controlled, deliberate. Years of training had taught his body efficiency, long after the reason for it had passed. His hair was cut short, gray threaded through what remained of its original brown. A trimmed beard lined his jaw, softening sharp angles without hiding them. His face bore the quiet wear of a man who had learned to endure more than explain. Elias was a veteran. The town knew that much, though little beyond it. He never spoke of where he had served or what he had done. War, to him, was not a story. It was a condition that lingered, shaping how he stood, how he listened, how he slept. It had taught him discipline, restraint, and the cost of hesitation. It had also taught him how quickly things could burn out of control. 4 dogs moved into place around him as he stepped onto the road. Atlas led from a half a step. He was a large German shepherd, nearly 8 years old, with a thick sable coat and a steady, grounded presence. His chest was broad, his movements calm and purposeful. Atlas did not rush. He scanned ahead with measured confidence, ears alert but relaxed, the way a leader conserved energy. Rowan took the left. Leaner and younger, his coat carried a warm reddish tone beneath the gray. His head turned constantly, ears flicking at every distant sound. Rowan was alert by nature, reactive but not reckless, driven by instinct sharpened through years beside Elias. Jasper moved on the right. Slightly smaller than Rowan, with darker eyes and a sharper expression, he carried himself with restless intelligence. Jasper noticed patterns, shifts, details others ignored. He glanced at Elias now and then, not for commands, but confirmation. Milo stayed closest. Barely 3 years old, he was the smallest of all the 4, with softer features and fur that lightened at the tips. One ear never quite stood straight. Milo brushed against Elias's leg as they walked, his presence quiet and constant. He was gentle, attentive, and deeply attuned to changes in mood. If Atlas was leadership and Rowan vigilance, Milo was empathy. There were no leashes, no collars, nothing to signal control. That absence unsettled people. Elias walked toward the residential part of town where houses clustered together, their windows dark, their porches empty. Ashford Creek valued order. It valued visible boundaries. Fences, rules, lines drawn clearly enough to trust. Elias did not offer that kind of reassurance. As he passed the first row of homes, a curtain shifted behind a window. Someone was awake early or unable to sleep. Elias did not look up. Atlas did, briefly, then returned his attention forward. The town had opinions about Elias Whitmore. Some said he was distant, others said he was broken. A few claimed the dogs were dangerous, that it was only a matter of time before something went wrong. Elias heard none of it directly. Rumors moved through Ashford Creek the way fog did, quietly, without asking permission. He stopped at the corner of Pine and Alder. Across the street stood a small blue house with peeling paint and a narrow porch. The yard was cluttered but lived in. A plastic toy truck lay tipped on its side near the steps. A jump rope stiff with frost curved through the grass. This was Sarah Coleman's house. Sarah Coleman was a widow in her early 30s, tall and slender, with a posture shaped by responsibility. Her hair was a deep chestnut brown, usually pulled back in a loose knot that never stayed neat. Her skin was pale, freckled, weathered by stress more than age. She had moved to Ashford Creek 3 years earlier after her husband died in a construction accident. Since then, she had learned how to carry grief quietly, how to raise a child while pretending she wasn't afraid of losing more. Elias had spoken to her only twice. Once to return a stray dog she had briefly fostered, and once to help her gather groceries after her daughter stumbled on the steps. Sarah had thanked him politely, her voice steady, her eyes tired but kind. She was cautious with people, careful with trust. Her daughter Lily was 6, small for her age, with light blonde hair that tangled no matter how often it was brushed. She was curious, loud in the way children were when they hadn't yet learned fear. Lily waved at Milo whenever she saw him. Milo always wagged back. The house was dark now. The world still held its breath. Elias rested his gloved hand briefly against his thigh. Atlas stopped instantly. Rowan, Jasper, and Milo followed without sound. For a moment, there was only the low hum of distant power lines and the faint movement of wind through trees. Elias inhaled slowly. Nothing was wrong, not yet. But something felt unsettled. The air carried a tension he recognized, the same pressure that had existed before storms, before alarms, before moments that changed everything. He exhaled and lifted his hand. They moved on. Behind them, Ashford Creek slept, unaware that this ordinary morning was already preparing to test what loyalty, discipline, and quiet courage truly meant. Elias Whitmore had learned to trust the smallest disruptions. In war, it was never the loud noise that killed you first, but the thing that felt out of place, the silence that arrived too early, the smell that didn't match the wind, the pause where motion should have been. As he and the dogs moved past the blue house and toward the bend where Pine Street sloped gently downhill, that sense returned, subtle but insistent, tightening somewhere beneath his ribs. Atlas felt it before Elias named it. The big German shepherd slowed, not stopping outright, but shortening his stride until the rhythm of the pack shifted. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. Rowan mirrored him instantly, ears snapping forward, body angling left as if mapping an invisible line through the fog. Jasper halted his side glances and focused ahead, muscles tightening beneath his coat. Milo pressed closer to Elias's leg, tail lowering without fear, only awareness. Elias noticed all of it. He stopped walking. The air smelled wrong. At first it was faint, so faint it might have been imagined. Not the clean bite of wood smoke from a distant chimney, not the damp mineral scent of fog lifting off cold ground. This was sharper, dirtier. It scratched the back of the throat even before it fully registered. Elias drew another breath, slower this time, isolating it. Burned plastic, old wood, heat that had no business existing at this hour. Smoke. He did not react immediately. Panic wasted time. He turned his head slightly, scanning through the gray. Visibility was poor, but the fog thinned in patches, and through one of those breaks he saw it, a faint, pulsing orange reflection bouncing weakly off a low cloud. Not a flame yet, just light where there should have been none. Atlas stopped completely. Elias rested a hand on his thigh again, a habit rather than a signal. The dogs held. Atlas stood tall, chest forward, gaze locked downhill. Rowan shifted his weight, ready. Jasper's tail went still. Milo's ears flattened just enough to show unease. Elias followed the glow with his eyes. It was coming from the lower end of Alder Street, where older houses stood closer together, their wooden frames dry from years of harsh summers. He knew that stretch well. The road narrowed there, flanked by hedges and aging fences. Response time would be slow. Fire trucks would have to come from the station near the river, weaving uphill through fog and narrow turns. He did the math without thinking. Distance, wind, time. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than the dogs. His voice was rough but steady. "Let's see." He stepped forward. Atlas moved with him, resuming his lead without hesitation. The others fell into place, the pack flowing downhill as one, their pace controlled but purposeful. Elias did not run. Running before you understood the situation led to mistakes. The smell intensified with every step. The fog ahead thinned further, disturbed by rising heat. Then Elias heard it, a faint crackling, uneven and hungry, carried low through the air. Fire had its own language. Once you learned it, you never forgot. They rounded the corner. The house stood 2 doors down from Sarah Coleman's place, an older single-story structure with weathered siding and a narrow front porch. Flames licked out from one of the side windows, not fully consuming the frame yet, but aggressive enough to mean the fire had been burning for several minutes at least. Smoke poured from gaps in the roof, thick and dark, climbing fast. A porch chair lay overturned, its paint blistering. Curtains inside glowed briefly, then vanished as the fire claimed them. Elias stopped short. There was no screaming yet. That was not a relief. That was a warning. Atlas took 2 steps forward on his own, then paused, looking back at Elias. His eyes were clear, focused, waiting. Elias scanned the street. No cars moving, no people outside. Ashford Creek was still asleep, sealed behind walls and locked doors, unaware that one of its houses was already losing the fight. Movement flickered behind the front window. Elias's chest tightened. He saw a figure retreat, then reappear, disoriented. A woman. She was tall and thin, her movements frantic but restrained, like someone fighting panic with sheer will. Her hair was dark blonde, pulled back hastily, loose strands clinging to her face. Soot streaked her cheek, already marking her skin. She moved toward the door, then stopped, coughing violently, one hand braced against the wall. A child appeared behind her, small, barefoot, pajamas too thin for the cold. The child clung to the woman's leg, eyes wide, reflecting firelight that had no business being that close to them. Elias exhaled once, sharply. Atlas turned forward again without command. "Stay with me," Elias said, his voice low but firm, projecting calm the way he had been taught to do when chaos pressed in. He didn't shout. Shouting fractured focus. Rowan broke formation first, veering toward the side of the house where smoke was thickest. He moved fast but controlled, nose low, testing airflow. Jasper followed, circling wider, looking for openings, weaknesses, any path the fire hadn't fully claimed. Milo hesitated only a fraction of a second before darting forward, stopping just short of the porch, his body low, ears back, tail wagging once in a small, uncertain arc. Elias moved to the edge of the yard. "Hey!" he called, loud enough to carry, controlled enough not to break. "You in there." The woman turned toward the sound. Relief flashed across her face, quickly chased by fear. "I can't," she tried, then dissolved into coughing again, bending forward, shielding the child with her body. The front door frame was hot. Elias could see that much from where he stood. Heat shimmered in the air, distorting edges. He assessed quickly. The fire was not fully involved yet, but it was moving fast. Smoke inhalation would get them long before. Flames did. Atlas stood at the base of the porch steps now, looking back again, waiting. Elias nodded once. Atlas surged forward, bounding up the steps and through the open doorway in a controlled rush, keeping his body low. Smoke rolled around him, but he did not falter. Rowan appeared moments later at the side window, leaping up and slamming his weight against the glass. It cracked, but didn't break. Jasper joined him immediately, striking higher, smarter. The pane shattered inward, releasing a burst of black smoke and heat. The woman screamed, startled, then froze as fresh air rushed in. "Come to the window!" Elias shouted, positioning himself beneath it. "Now!" Inside, the woman hesitated only a second before obeying. She scooped the child up, clutching her tight. Atlas reappeared at her side, nudging insistently, guiding her away from the door and toward the broken window. Milo darted forward, barking sharply, high-pitched, urgent, cutting through the roar of fire. The child's gaze snapped to him, fixation replacing panic. "Good," Elias thought. "Stay with that." The woman reached the window and hesitated again, looking down at the drop. It wasn't far, but fear distorted distance. "You can do it," Elias said, meeting her eyes. "I've got you." She swallowed hard and climbed through, lowering the child first. Elias took the child securely, setting her down behind him, away from the heat. The woman followed, stumbling slightly as her feet hit the ground. Elias caught at her elbow, steadying her without force. Behind them, the fire surged, reacting angrily to the sudden oxygen. Atlas burst out last. A beam collapsed inside the doorway just as he cleared it, sparks scattering across the porch. Heat washed over them in a wave. Atlas hit the ground hard, rolled once, then stood again immediately. Elias's breath caught. The fur along Atlas's left shoulder was singed, darkened. Skin beneath it glowed red, already blistering in places. Atlas held himself steady, ears back now, breath quick but controlled. He did not whine. He did not retreat. Elias crouched beside him instantly, hands moving with practiced efficiency, checking, assessing. "Easy," he murmured, voice tight. "Easy, boy." Sirens sounded faintly in the distance at last, distant and late, but coming. The woman sank to her knees in the grass, clutching the child, sobbing openly now that fear no longer needed to be contained. The child stared at Atlas, wide-eyed, then reached out with one small hand and touched his unburned side. "Doggy," she whispered. Atlas turned his head slightly toward her and wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The fire roared behind them, greedy and loud, but it had been beaten back from its prize, for now. The fire no longer roared the way it had moments before, but it still ruled the street. Flames crawled along the roofline of the house on Alder Street, breaking through in short, violent bursts, while thick smoke rolled upward and flattened itself against the low sky. When the first fire engine arrived, its red lights cut through the fog like blunt instruments, harsh and disorienting. The truck stopped at an awkward angle, tires crunching over frost, and firefighters spilled out with practiced urgency, their movements sharp, efficient, loud. Elias stepped back instinctively, guiding the woman and her child farther from the heat. He did not like crowds. He did not like noise. Years ago, noise had meant confusion, and confusion had meant loss. He positioned himself slightly apart from the growing cluster of neighbors who were now emerging from their houses in coats and slippers, drawn by sirens and the glow of fire. Atlas remained close, sitting despite the pain that pulled at his shoulder, his body angled protectively toward Elias and the child. Rowan and Jasper stood alert on either side, their silhouettes tense against the flashing lights. Milo hovered near the girl, tail wagging slowly, as if trying to reassure her that the danger had truly passed. A firefighter approached Elias first. He was a tall man in his early 40s, broad through the shoulders, with a square jaw and a dark beard visible beneath his helmet. His face was weathered, skin roughened by heat and smoke, and his eyes held the focused calm of someone who had seen too many nights like this one. The name stitched onto his turnout coat read M. Harlan. "Everyone out?" Harlan asked, voice firm but controlled, eyes scanning the scene. "Yes," Elias replied. He kept his tone even. "Just the two." Harlan nodded once, then glanced at Atlas. His gaze lingered. "Your dog?" "Mine," Elias said. Harlan crouched slightly, inspecting the burn with a professional eye. "Looks like a superficial burn. Painful, but manageable. You should get him checked." "I will." Harlan hesitated, then added, "Good work. Most people panic. You didn't." Elias gave a small nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the praise. Compliments made him uneasy. They implied expectation. Behind them, the woman had pulled the child into her arms again. Now that the immediate danger was gone, her fear had collapsed inward, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She sat on the curb, shoulders slumped, rocking slightly as she murmured reassurances. Her name, Elias learned when a paramedic knelt in front of her, was Emily Carter. Emily Carter was in her late 20s, tall and slim with narrow shoulders that made her look more fragile than she truly was. Her light brown hair hung loose now, pulled free from whatever ties she had rushed to remove when smoke filled the house. Soot marked her forehead and cheekbones, standing out against pale skin, flushed from heat and adrenaline. Her eyes were a striking, gray, sharp even through tears, the eyes of someone used to handling things on her own. The paramedic asked questions gently. Emily answered clearly, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She had lived in the house for 5 years. She worked nights at the assisted living center near the river. The fire had started in the kitchen. She had woken to the smell of smoke and barely had time to grab her daughter. Her daughter's name was Nora. She was 5 years old, small and thin, with dark hair that fell into her eyes in uneven strands. Nora clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, its fur singed slightly along one ear. She watched everything in silence, eyes tracking movement, absorbing details children were not supposed to notice. When Milo crept closer and sat beside her, she leaned into him without hesitation, fingers twisting gently into his fur. Elias watched the exchange, something tight in his chest easing just slightly. More people arrived, a second fire engine, a police cruiser, the street filled with sound and motion. Neighbors whispered in clusters, some pointing openly at the dogs, others staring at the burned house with hollow expressions. A man in a heavy coat muttered something about luck. Another woman crossed herself quietly. A police officer approached Elias. He was younger than Harlan, early 30s perhaps, with a clean-shaven face and a sharp, angular nose that gave him a perpetually serious expression. His uniform was crisp, his posture stiff. The badge on his chest read, Officer Daniel Reeves. "Sir," Reeves said, clipboard already in hand, "I need to ask you a few questions." Elias nodded. "Of course." Reeves glanced at the dogs, then back at Elias. His eyes held curiosity, but also a trace of unease. "You were the one who assisted with the rescue?" "Yes." "No protective equipment? No leash?" The questions were neutral on the surface, but Elias heard the edge beneath them. "No time," Elias replied. He kept his answers short. He had learned that explanations invited debate. Reeves scribbled something down. "Your name?" "Elias Whitmore." Recognition flickered briefly across the officer's face. "Not personal, institutional." "You live out by the tree line?" "Yes." Reeves hesitated, then asked, "Are the dogs trained?" "They're disciplined," Elias said. Reeves didn't smile. He nodded again, clearly unsure what to do with that distinction. "I'll need to note their involvement, protocol." Elias met his gaze steadily. "Do what you need to." The officer moved on, his attention already shifting to the next task. Elias exhaled slowly. This was the part he disliked most. Not the fire, not the risk, the scrutiny that followed. Behind him, Atlas shifted his weight and let out a low sound, more breath than voice. Elias knelt immediately, resting a hand against the dog's unburned side. Atlas leaned into the touch, steadying himself. The burn was already swelling, skin tight and angry beneath singed fur. Elias cataloged it mentally, planning the drive to the emergency veterinarian once things settled. A woman stepped forward hesitantly from the edge of the crowd. She was older, in her late 50s, with a stocky build and short gray hair, tucked beneath a knitted hat. Her coat was thick, practical, buttoned wrong in her haste. Her eyes were soft, worried. She wrung her hands as she approached Emily. "Oh, honey," the woman said, voice breaking slightly. "I heard the sirens and... Are you all right?" Emily nodded, exhaustion weighing down the gesture. "We're okay, thanks to him." She glanced toward Elias. The woman followed her gaze, then looked at Atlas. Her expression shifted from concern to something closer to awe. "Those dogs, they went right in there." "Yes," Emily said quietly. "They did." The woman swallowed. "I'll bring blankets, food, whatever you need." Emily managed a faint smile. "Thank you." The fire was under control now. Hoses hissed as water soaked smoldering wood. Steam rose in heavy clouds, mixing with smoke and fog until the street looked unreal, suspended between states. The immediate danger had passed, but the damage remained, blackened and irreversible. Elias stood, brushing dirt from his knees. He glanced down at Atlas. "We're heading out," he murmured. "Doctor." Atlas responded by standing as well, though the movement was careful. Rowan and Jasper closed in automatically, flanking him. Milo lingered a moment longer by Nora, then trotted back to Elias's side. Emily noticed the movement. She pushed herself to her feet, still holding her daughter. "Wait," she said. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "I didn't even get your name." Elias paused. "Elias." "I'm Emily," she said. "Thank you. I don't know how—" "You don't need to," Elias interrupted gently. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. "You're safe. That's enough." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Still, thank you." Nora leaned out of her mother's arms and waved at Milo. "Bye," she whispered. Milo wagged his tail. Elias turned away before the moment stretched further. He led the dogs back up the street, away from the lights and the noise. Behind him, Ashford Creek buzzed with the aftermath, with questions and explanations and the slow work of putting things back in order. Ahead, the fog thickened again, swallowing sound, restoring quiet. The fire had taken a house. It had not taken everyone. Elias walked on, already aware that the town would not forget what it had seen that morning. Neither would he. The fog closed behind Elias Whitmore as he led the dogs away from Alder Street, swallowing the noise of sirens and murmured voices until only the steady rhythm of boots and paws remained. Ashford Creek returned to its earlier silence, but it was no longer the same kind. This silence was heavy with afterthought, with questions that had not yet found words. Atlas walked more slowly now. The burn along his left shoulder had begun to stiffen, pulling at his movement despite his effort to hide it. Elias noticed every adjustment in the dog's gait, every careful placement of weight. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He had seen this before. Pain managed through discipline, suffering measured rather than expressed. It was a language he knew too well. They reached Elias's old pickup, parked near the edge of town where the road curved into forest. The truck was a dull green, its paint faded and scarred by years of use. Elias opened the passenger door first. "Up," he said quietly. Atlas hesitated only a moment before climbing in, careful and deliberate. Rowan jumped into the back without being asked, settling near the cab, eyes alert. Jasper followed, circling once before lying down. Milo waited until Elias was seated before hopping in beside Atlas, pressing his small body close, offering warmth and reassurance. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic took 20 minutes. Elias drove without music, hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road. The fog thinned as they climbed slightly out of town, replaced by a pale morning light that made the world look exposed and raw. Elias's thoughts drifted despite his efforts to contain them. He replayed the moment Atlas emerged from the house, the flash of heat, the smell of burned fur. He did not regret the decision. Regret was a luxury, but the weight of responsibility pressed hard. The clinic sat just off the highway, a low concrete building with a faded blue sign that read Ashford Emergency Veterinary Care. Elias parked close to the entrance. As he opened the door, Atlas shifted, bracing himself. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. The waiting room was small, utilitarian. A woman behind the front desk looked up immediately. She was in her mid-40s, average height, with short black hair streaked with gray and a face shaped by long hours and practical compassion. Her name tag read, Dr. Karen Liu. "What happened?" she asked, already stepping out from behind the counter. "Burn," Elias replied. "House fire, left shoulder." Dr. Liu knelt beside Atlas, her movements calm and confident. She examined the injury carefully, fingers light but precise. Atlas held still, muscles tense but compliant. "Second degree," she said after a moment. "Painful but treatable. He's lucky." Elias nodded. "He usually is." Dr. Liu glanced up at him, studying his face briefly. She had seen men like him before, quiet, controlled, carrying more than they admitted. "We'll need to sedate him lightly to clean it properly." "Do it," Elias said without hesitation. As the staff guided Atlas away, Milo whined softly, then fell silent when Elias placed a hand on his head. Rowan and Jasper remained still, watching the door. Elias sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The adrenaline that had carried him through the morning drained away, leaving behind fatigue that settled deep. Time passed slowly. While he waited, the door opened again. A man entered, shaking off cold air, his posture tense. He was in his early 60s, tall, with a long face and a neatly trimmed gray beard that framed sharp cheekbones. His eyes were thoughtful, wary. He wore a heavy wool coat and carried himself with the deliberate calm of someone used to responsibility. Elias recognized him immediately. Mayor Thomas Caldwell. Caldwell noticed Elias at the same time. His brows lifted slightly, surprise crossing his face before he masked it. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, approaching. "I thought I might find you here." Elias stood. "Mayor?" Caldwell gestured toward the treatment area. "Your dog?" "Yes. I heard what happened this morning." Caldwell's voice was measured, diplomatic. "People are talking." "They always do," Elias replied. Caldwell studied him, hands clasped behind his back. "This town has rules, safety concerns. You know that." "I know," Elias said evenly. "But," Caldwell continued, pausing deliberately, You also saved 2 lives today. That complicates things. Elias met his gaze. I didn't do it for credit. I know, Caldwell sighed. Still, there will be discussions, council meetings. Some will argue your dogs are a risk. Others will say they're heroes. And you? Elias asked. Caldwell hesitated, the weight of the question settling in his expression. I think the town owes you gratitude, but gratitude fades faster than fear. Before Elias could respond, Dr. Liu returned. He'll be fine, she said. He'll need rest, medication, and follow-up care. No strenuous activity for a while. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you. Atlas was brought aback shortly after, bandaged and groggy but alert. His eyes found Elias immediately. Elias knelt beside him, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. Atlas exhaled, slow and steady. They returned home as the morning wore on. Ashford Creek was fully awake now. People stood in yards, watched from porches. Some nodded as Elias passed. A few waved. The looks were different than before. Curiosity mixed with something like respect, though uncertainty still lingered. At his cabin, Elias settled Atlas inside near the fireplace, laying out blankets and water. Milo curled up beside him instantly. Rowan took position near the window. Jasper paced once, then lay down near the door. A knock came unexpectedly. Elias stiffened, then moved to answer. Emily Carter stood on his porch, bundled in a borrowed coat. Her hair was still damp, pulled back loosely. Her face looked paler now that the crisis had passed, but her eyes were steady. I hope this is all right, she said quickly. I wanted to check on him. Elias stepped aside. He's resting. Emily entered quietly, stopping short when she saw Atlas. Her expression softened. She knelt carefully. Thank you, she whispered, not to Elias but to the dog. Atlas lifted his head slightly, tail thumping once. Emily stood, swallowing. Honora wanted to come, but she's exhausted. She hesitated. I know the town. I know how people talk. I wanted you to hear it from me. I'll say what I saw, to anyone who asks. Elias nodded. That's your choice. Emily met his eyes. It's the right one. She left soon after, the door closing gently behind her. Elias returned to the hearth and sat. The fire crackled softly, warmth spreading through the room. Atlas slept, breathing slow and even. Outside, Ashford Creek carried on, changed in small, almost invisible ways. Elias knew this moment would not last. Attention never did. But for now, there was quiet. And in that quiet, something new had taken root. Ashford Creek did not change overnight. Towns like it never did. They absorbed events slowly, the way cold seeped into wood, almost unnoticed until it settled deep enough to matter. The fire on Alder Street became the first thing people spoke about in the mornings and the last thing they discussed before bed. It traveled through the town in fragments, through the grocery store aisle, across the counter at the diner, whispered between neighbors standing too close to their fences. By the third day, the story had grown heavier. Elias Whitmore noticed the difference immediately. When he walked the dogs that morning, people watched more openly. Some nodded. A few offered quiet words of thanks. Others looked away, their expressions closed, uncertain. Gratitude and fear lived close together in Ashford Creek, separated by little more than habit. Atlas remained inside the cabin, resting as ordered. His bandaged shoulder limited his movement, but his presence was felt everywhere. Rowan took the lead on the morning walk now, his posture more rigid than usual. Jasper lingered closer to Elias than before, glancing frequently toward the houses lining the road. Milo trotted faithfully at Elias's side, occasionally looking back toward the cabin, as if reluctant to leave the injured leader behind. That afternoon, a notice appeared on the bulletin board outside the post office. Town council meeting, public safety discussion, 6:30 p.m. Elias read it without surprise. Mayor Caldwell's warning still echoed in his mind. Gratitude fades faster than fear. He considered not going. He had avoided meetings for years, avoided rooms full of opinions and thinly disguised judgments. But avoidance was also a decision, and he had learned what happened when decisions were left to others. So, that evening, Elias cleaned up, changed into a dark sweater and jeans, and left the dogs at home. Rowan whined softly at the door, unsettled by the separation. Elias rested his hand briefly on the dog's head. "Guard," he said quietly. The town hall sat at the center of Ashford Creek, a squat brick building with narrow windows and a flagpole that creaked in the wind. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over rows of folding chairs. The room was already half full when Elias entered. Mayor Thomas Caldwell stood near the front, speaking quietly with a woman Elias did not recognize. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with straight blonde hair cut sharply at the jaw. Her posture was rigid, arms folded tight against her chest. Her skin was fair, almost translucent under the harsh lights, and her eyes were sharp, calculating. This was Margaret Hale. Margaret Hale was not from Ashford Creek originally. She had moved there 6 years earlier after her husband died in a highway accident outside the county. Since then, she had become a vocal advocate for stricter safety ordinances. She believed in control, in prevention through regulation. People described her as efficient, relentless, and exhausting. Margaret believed emotion clouded judgment. She trusted rules. Elias took a seat near the back. A murmur rippled through the room as people noticed him. Some turned fully in their chairs. Others pretended not to. The meeting began promptly. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss public safety concerns following the recent fire on Alder Street. Specifically, the involvement of unrestrained animals in the rescue." Margaret stood immediately. "This is not about gratitude," she said, her voice precise, measured. "It's about precedent. What happened was fortunate. That doesn't make it safe. Unleashed dogs entering an active fire zone is reckless. What if someone had been hurt? What if a child had panicked?" A few people nodded. Elias remained still. Emily Carter stood next. She looked different than she had at the fire, cleaner, calmer. Her hair was pulled back neatly now, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, nothing that drew attention. But her voice carried when she spoke. "My daughter and I are alive because of those dogs," Emily said, "and because of Elias. I don't know what rules say, but I know what happened." Margaret turned toward her. "No one is questioning your experience, Emily, but personal outcomes don't replace policy. They should inform it," Emily replied quietly. A man near the front stood. He was broad-shouldered, mid-50s, with a heavy mustache and rough hands that spoke of manual labor. His name was Caleb Turner, a mill worker who had lived in Ashford Creek his entire life. "Those dogs didn't hurt anyone," he said. "They saved people. That's the truth." Another voice rose from the opposite side of the room. "This time," someone muttered. The tension thickened. Mayor Caldwell raised a hand. "Order, please." Elias stood then. The room fell quiet. He did not move toward the podium. He stayed where he was, his posture relaxed, his hands at his sides. "I won't argue," he said evenly. "I won't convince anyone. You'll decide what you need to decide." Margaret watched him closely. "Do you deny that your dogs present a risk?" "They're disciplined," Elias said. "They're trained to assess, not react." "Without leashes," Margaret pressed. "Yes." "That's not discipline," she replied sharply. "That's trust." "Yes," Elias said again. Silence followed. Caldwell looked between them. "We're not voting tonight," he said finally. "We'll review options." Margaret frowned but said nothing more. The meeting ended without resolution. People filed out in clusters, conversations low and intense. Elias left without speaking further. Outside, the night air was cold and clear. Stars were visible, sharp points against black sky. Elias walked home alone, footsteps echoing softly on pavement. At the cabin, Rowan met him at the door, tail wagging in relief. Jasper and Milo followed close behind. Atlas lifted his head from his blankets, eyes alert. Elias knelt beside him. "They're talking," he murmured. Atlas exhaled. Later that night, as Elias sat by the fire, he understood something clearly for the first time. The fire on Alder Street had not been the test. It had been the opening. The real trial was still coming. The notice arrived 2 mornings after the council meeting, folded once and tucked carefully beneath the windshield wiper of Elias Whitmore's truck. It was printed on pale yellow paper, the kind the town reserved for official matters that were meant to look calm even when they were not. Elias found it just after sunrise, the fog still clinging low to the ground, his breath faint in the cold air as he finished loading supplies into the truck. He did not read it immediately. That hesitation was not fear, it was recognition. Some messages carried weight before words ever touched the eye. Atlas watched from the cabin doorway as Elias unfolded the paper. The dog's bandaged shoulder limited his movement, but his gaze was sharp, attentive. He sensed the shift in Elias's posture, the subtle tightening of shoulders that only those closest ever noticed. Rowan stood near the truck, ears angled forward. Jasper paused mid-step. Milo sat, tail still. The notice was formal and precise. Notice of review, potential public safety violation. Subject, unrestrained canines. Repeated exposure to residential areas. Action pending, temporary restriction order. Elias read it once, then again. It was not an order yet. It was a warning dressed as procedure. The town would review his situation. In the meantime, he was advised to keep the dogs confined to his property or restrained when outside municipal boundaries. Advised. Elias folded the paper carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. He did not tear it up. He did not curse. Anger wasted energy. He had learned that long ago. He turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and antiseptic. Atlas lay near the hearth, his head lifted, eyes tracking Elias's movement. Elias knelt beside him and rested a hand gently on the dog's uninjured side. Atlas leaned into the touch. "They're pushing," Elias murmured. He did not say who. Atlas didn't need clarification. Outside, the dog sensed the tension but did not react. Rowan paced once, then settled. Jasper lowered himself near the porch steps. Milo pressed close to Atlas, his small body curved protectively along the larger dog's flank. By mid-morning, the town had already begun to talk. Elias encountered it first at the general store. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and conversation dipped briefly before resuming in quieter tones. He moved through the aisles methodically, selecting what he needed without looking around. At the counter, Ruth Keller, the store clerk, rang up his items. Ruth was in her late 60s, short and round, with silver hair always pulled into a neat bun. Her skin was creased from years of smiling at customers who needed reassurance more than groceries. She hesitated before handing him the receipt. "They left a notice," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "I know," Elias replied. Ruth swallowed. "Some folks signed a petition. Others tore it up." Elias nodded. That fit. Outside, he loaded the supplies into his truck. As he closed the tailgate, a voice called out, "Elias!" He turned. Samuel Brooks stood a few feet away, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. Sam was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a narrow face and a dark beard that always looked a day too long. He worked as a contractor when work was available, fixed roofs and fences when storms came through. His eyes were sharp, thoughtful, but often clouded by something unspoken. Sam had lost his younger brother in a logging accident years earlier. Since then, he trusted animals more than machines, and silence more than promises. "You hear about the review?" Sam asked. "Yes." Sam nodded grimly. "They're scared. Fear's allowed," Elias said. "Action based on it is the problem." Sam studied him for a moment. "If it goes bad, you won't be alone." Elias met his gaze. "I don't expect anyone to stand for me." Sam shook his head. "Maybe you should." That afternoon, a new development arrived without warning. A patrol car turned up the dirt road leading to Elias's cabin just after noon. Dust rose briefly, then settled. Elias watched from the porch as the car stopped. The engine cut. The door opened. Deputy Harold Finch stepped out. Finch was in his late 50s, stocky, with a thick neck and thinning hair hidden beneath his cap. His face was weathered, cheeks red from years of exposure to wind and sun. A heavy mustache sat above his lip, carefully trimmed. Finch had been a deputy in Ashford Creek for over 20 years. He was not cruel, but he was rigid. Rules were how he had survived a career full of unpredictable people. "Mr. Whitmore," Finch said, adjusting his belt as he approached. His voice was firm, but not hostile. "Deputy," Elias replied. "I'm here to observe compliance," Finch said. "Nothing more." Atlas growled low in his throat, a sound of warning rather than threat. Elias placed a hand against the dog's shoulder immediately. Atlas stilled. "They're on my property," Elias said, "and under control." Finch nodded, eyes scanning the dogs carefully. "For now." He hesitated, then added, "Between you and me, I don't like this, but my job isn't to like things." "I understand," Elias said. He did. Finch lingered a moment longer, then returned to his car and drove away, leaving behind tracks that would fade by evening. That night, Elias did not sleep much. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling branches against the cabin walls. He sat at the small table near the window, the folded notice beside his coffee mug. His thoughts returned, unbidden, to another night long ago, when orders had come down written in careful language, when consequences had followed whether he agreed with them or not. Atlas shifted restlessly in his sleep, letting out a low whine. Elias moved to him immediately, kneeling, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. "You did right," he whispered, "whatever comes." Morning brought a break in the weather. The fog lifted, leaving the sky clear and sharp. Elias stepped outside with Rowan, Jasper, and Milo, keeping close to the tree line as advised. The road was quiet, until a car appeared at the bend. It slowed, then stopped. Margaret Hale stepped out. She wore a long coat buttoned to the neck, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe ponytail. Her face was pale in the sunlight, eyes fixed and resolute. She did not approach immediately. She stood by her car for a moment, arms crossed, as if bracing herself. Elias waited. "I didn't come to argue," Margaret said finally, her voice carrying clearly in the open air. "I came to understand." Elias regarded her steadily. "Understanding doesn't require permission." Margaret exhaled. "My husband died because a driver panicked, because there was chaos where there should have been order." Her jaw tightened. "I don't believe in exceptions." "And yet," Elias said quietly, "exceptions happen." She looked past him, toward the cabin, where Atlas lay visible through the open door. "Your dogs are disciplined," she admitted. "That makes them dangerous in a different way." "Danger isn't the same as harm," Elias replied. Margaret held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharply. "The council will vote within the week." She turned and left without another word. Elias watched her go. He knew then that whatever decision came, it would not be clean. It would not satisfy everyone. But the line had been drawn, and it would be crossed one way or another. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias stood on his porch. The dogs gathered around him. Atlas rested more comfortably now, healing slowly. The forest behind the cabin whispered with evening life. Ashford Creek was choosing its story, and so was he. The storm arrived without warning, as storms in Ashford Creek often did. By late afternoon, the sky darkened to the color of bruised steel, and the air grew heavy and restless. Wind bent the treetops toward the valley, carrying the sharp scent of rain and the deeper, older smell of earth being torn open. Elias Whitmore felt it long before the first thunder rolled across the hills. The dogs felt it too. Rowan paced the porch, ears angled skyward. Jasper watched the tree line, muscles tight. Milo pressed closer to Atlas, who lay near the doorway, still healing but alert. Something was coming. It always did. The council vote was scheduled for the next evening. Until then, the town waited, uneasy, divided, pretending normalcy while bracing for outcome. Elias had spent the day repairing a section of fence near the back of his property, working slowly, deliberately, the way he always did when his thoughts threatened to run ahead of his hands. He was tightening the last bolt when the wind shifted sharply, followed by the crack of thunder close enough to rattle his teeth. Rain came down hard, sudden sheets pounding the roof and ground alike. Within minutes, the dirt road leading past his cabin turned slick and dark. Elias gathered the dogs inside. Atlas struggled to his feet, refusing help, his bandaged shoulder stiff but functional. Elias did not argue. Independence mattered. Night fell early under the storm's weight. The first call came just after 9. Elias was seated at the table, the folded notice still tucked inside his jacket pocket, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He answered without hesitation. "Mr. Whitmore." The voice on the other end was tight, controlled, but urgent. "This is Officer Daniel Reeves." Elias straightened. "Go on." "We've got a situation on Ridgeway Pass," Reeves said. "Mudslide. A car went off the shoulder. 2 occupants, 1 trapped. Fire department's delayed. Trees down. We're trying to reach them on foot, but visibility's bad." Elias did not speak immediately. He pictured Ridgeway Pass, narrow and winding, bordered by steep drop-offs and loose rock. In weather like this, it was a death trap. Reeves hesitated, then continued. "I know what the council's reviewing. I know what I'm not supposed to ask, but I also know what your dogs can do." The line went quiet. Atlas lifted his head, ears forward. Rowan and Jasper moved closer, sensing the shift in Elias's breathing. Milo whimpered softly. "Where exactly?" Elias asked. Reeves exhaled audibly. "Mile marker 17. We've got flares up, but the rain's killing visibility. The passenger's injured, the driver's panicking." Elias stood. "I'm coming." He ended the call before Reeves could respond. The drive to Ridgeway Pass was slow and careful. Rain lashed the windshield, and fallen branches littered the road. Elias parked where the pavement ended, the police cruiser's lights flashing, weakly through the downpour. Reeves stood near the edge of the shoulder, his uniform soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. He was younger than Elias remembered, his sharp features drawn tight with stress, jaw clenched beneath the rain. "You shouldn't be here," Reeves said as Elias stepped out. "I know," Elias replied. "Where are they?" Reeves pointed downslope. About 30 yards down, cars wedged against a tree, grounds unstable. Elias scanned the terrain. Mud and rock shifted underfoot, slick and treacherous. He turned to the dogs. "Stay close. Watch your footing." Atlas moved first despite his injury, his steps measured. Rowan flanked wide, testing the ground. Jasper followed Elias directly, head low, reading the slope. Milo stayed near Atlas, close enough to offer balance if needed. They reached the vehicle quickly. It was a dark sedan, nose down, rear wheels barely gripping the slope. Inside, a man shouted incoherently, panic overtaking reason. The passenger door was crushed inward. The driver was Evan Pierce, early 30s, tall and wiry, with a narrow face and unshaven jaw. His eyes were wide, darting, breath coming in short gasps. He worked as a delivery driver out of town, unused to roads like these, unused to losing control. The passenger was Lena Morales, late 20s, small and dark-haired, her skin olive-toned, her face pale with pain. Blood streaked her temple, and her right leg was pinned awkwardly. Atlas climbed onto the hood without hesitation, his weight stabilizing the vehicle. He braced himself against the windshield frame, muscles trembling but steady. Rowan circled to the passenger side, finding a narrow path through the mud. Jasper positioned near the rear, anchoring himself, ready to counter any shift. Milo barked once, sharp, commanding, cutting through Evan's frantic shouting. "Look at him," Elias said firmly, meeting Evan's eyes. "Breathe. Do exactly what I tell you." Evan froze, startled by the calm authority in Elias's voice. He nodded shakily. The ground shifted suddenly, a low groan rippling through the slope. Lena cried out softly. Atlas adjusted instantly, redistributing his weight, holding the car steady long enough for Elias to wedge a fallen branch beneath the frame. Headlights appeared above. Another cruiser. Reinforcements. Within minutes, Lena was freed, carefully lifted, and passed upslope. Evan followed, shaken but unharmed. As paramedics took over, Reeves turned to Elias, rain dripping from his cap. "You know what this means," Reeves said quietly. Elias nodded. "I do." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the town washed raw and quiet. News of the rescue spread faster than the rainwater through the streets. By noon, the council chamber was full again, tension thick enough to taste. Mayor Caldwell called the meeting to order. Margaret Hale sat rigidly near the front, hands folded tight, her sharp features unreadable. Emily Carter sat too, Rose back, Nora beside her, clutching Milo's old rope toy. Sam Brooks stood along the wall, arms crossed. Officer Reeves spoke first, recounting the night in clear factual terms. Fire response delays, terrain instability. Outcome. He did not embellish, he did not soften. Margaret rose when he finished. "This does not erase the risk," she said, her voice steady but strained. "It proves my point. We cannot rely on exceptions." Elias stood. "I didn't ask permission last night," he said. "I acted, because people were going to die." A silence followed. Mayor Caldwell leaned forward. "The council will vote now." The decision was not unanimous. It never was, but the motion passed. Elias would be allowed to continue as he had, under one condition: formal recognition of the dogs as trained working animals. Accountability. Responsibility. Elias accepted without comment. That evening, back at the cabin, the dogs rested around the hearth. Atlas lay stretched out, exhausted but intact. Elias sat nearby, the weight of the past days settling slowly. He knew the town had not chosen him. It had chosen necessity. For now, that was enough. The morning after the council vote arrived gently, as if Ashford Creek itself had grown tired of holding its breath. The sky was pale blue, scrubbed clean by the storm, and the air carried the crisp scent of wet pine and distant smoke from wood stoves waking for the day. Sunlight filtered through the trees behind Elias Whitmore's cabin in thin, deliberate beams, warming the porch boards one strip at a time. Elias sat on the steps with a mug of black coffee cupped between his hands. His posture was relaxed in a way it rarely had been, shoulders no longer braced against an invisible weight. The decision had not erased the past week, but it had given it a shape, an ending, or at least a pause long enough to matter. Atlas lay stretched beside him, his massive frame half in the sun, half in shadow. The bandages on his shoulder had been changed that morning, clean and snug, the fur around them trimmed short. The burn would scar. Elias knew that already. Atlas did not seem concerned. His breathing was deep and steady, his amber eyes half-lidded but alert, tracking the movement of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. There was a dignity in him that pain had not touched. Rowan sat near the edge of the porch, upright and vigilant, his sleek gray coat catching the light. Jasper lay closer to the door, chin on his paws, eyes flicking between Elias and the tree line. Milo had claimed the spot nearest Atlas, curled against the older dog's ribs like a living brace, his smaller body rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Elias looked up as a familiar station wagon rolled slowly into view. It stopped near the porch, and the engine cut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Margaret Hale stepped out. She looked different than she had at the council meeting. The severity remained. Margaret was not a woman who shed her edges easily, but something had softened. Her blonde hair was no longer pulled into its usual tight restraint, instead falling loosely to her shoulders. She wore a simple dark coat and jeans, practical and unremarkable. The sharp lines of her face were still there, but her eyes held something new: hesitation. Elias stood. Margaret paused at the foot of the steps, hands clasped together, fingers interlaced tightly. Up close, the tension in her posture was more evident. She was tall and slender, her movements precise even now, as if she measured each step before committing to it. "I won't stay long," she said. Her voice was controlled, but quieter than before. I needed to come." Elias nodded once. "You're here." Margaret's gaze moved to Atlas. She took him in fully this time. The size, the scar, the way his tail thumped once when Elias shifted. "He's healing," she observed. "He will," Elias said. She swallowed. "I watched the footage, from Ridgeway Pass. I read the reports, twice." "And?" Elias asked. Margaret exhaled slowly. "I built my life around the idea that control prevents loss, that if everything is contained tightly enough, nothing terrible can get through." Her jaw tightened. "But my husband didn't die because there was too little control. He died because life doesn't ask permission." Elias said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence sometimes gave people the space they needed to finish difficult truths. "I was wrong," Margaret said finally. The words seemed to cost her, not about caution, but about you, and about them. Atlas shifted, lifting his head slightly. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. Margaret stiffened instinctively, then forced herself to remain still. "They don't scare me," she said softly. "What scares me is how long I let fear speak louder than evidence." Elias nodded. "Fear's loud." Margaret managed a small, humorless smile. "Yes, it is." She straightened. "The council asked me to draft the final language, recognizing them as working animals. I did." She hesitated. "I did it carefully." "I expected nothing less," Elias replied. She glanced at him, surprised, then inclined her head. "Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore." "Margaret," Elias said. She turned, paused, then left without another word. The town responded in smaller ways. A hand-painted sign appeared outside the diner 2 days later. "Thank you to our rescue dogs." Someone left a basket of dog biscuits on Elias's porch. Another neighbor dropped off fresh bandages without knocking. None of it was loud. None of it needed to be. Atlas's recovery progressed steadily. By the end of the week, he could walk the perimeter of the property again, slow but proud, refusing help. Elias did not push him. Healing followed its own timeline. He knew better than to rush it. One afternoon, a young man approached the cabin hesitantly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a beard that framed a face still bruised with healing cuts. His posture was awkward, unsure. Elias recognized him immediately. Evan Pierce. Evan stopped several feet from the porch, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. His voice was rough, emotion pressing close to the surface. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." "You're here," Elias said. "That's what matters." Evan nodded, swallowing. "I brought this." He held out a small wooden plaque. It was crude, clearly handmade, the letters uneven but deliberate. It read, "Steady saves lives." Elias accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Evan glanced at Atlas. "He's incredible." Atlas lifted his head and sneezed. Evan laughed despite himself. "Guess that's fair." As summer edged closer, Ashford Creek began to settle into its new understanding. The dogs were no longer whispered about as a threat. They were acknowledged, observed, respected. Children learned to give them space. Adults learned when to ask and when to trust. Emily Carter stopped by one afternoon with Nora, who clutched a sketchbook to her chest. Nora was small for her age, sedan, dark-haired with wide, thoughtful eyes. She knelt carefully near Atlas, sketching his broad head, his scar, the way his ears angled slightly forward even at rest. "He's a hero," Nora said matter-of-factly. Atlas thumped his tail once. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in amber and gold, Elias stood at the edge of his property with the dogs gathered around him. Atlas leaned lightly against his leg, healed enough now to bear the weight. Rowan and Jasper flanked them. Milo sat proudly at the front, chest puffed out as if guarding the horizon. Ashford Creek lay below, quiet and unafraid. Elias knew life would continue to test boundaries. It always did. But for now, the town had learned something essential. Not about dogs, not even about him, but about the difference between control and care. He rested his hand on Atlas's head, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. "Good work," he murmured. The dogs did not move. They did not need to. They had already done enough. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire from the heavens. They come quietly, on four paws, in the middle of an ordinary day. They appear when a heart chooses courage over fear, when loyalty stands firm even in pain, and when love moves forward without asking for permission. Some may call it coincidence, others may call it instinct, but those who have lived long enough know this truth. Nothing that saves a life is accidental. Perhaps God does not always reach down with his own hands. Perhaps he sends help in forms we do not expect, a neighbor who refuses to look away, a stranger who steps forward, or an animal whose heart is purer than our doubts. In our daily lives, we face smaller fires every day. Moments of fear, moments of division, moments when it feels safer to stay silent than to do what is right. And yet, time and again we are gently reminded, faith is not about control, it is about trust. Trust that goodness still walks among us. Trust that love, when given freely, always finds its way back. Trust that God sees even the quiet acts of courage, especially the ones no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, perhaps it is because you recognize something familiar in it, a memory, a loss, or a hope you thought had grown too quiet. If so, I invite you to share this story with someone who may need it today. Leave a comment and tell us about the animals, the people, or the moments that restored your faith. And if you wish to continue walking this path of gentle stories and quiet miracles, consider subscribing and becoming part of this community. May God bless you and protect those you love. May he grant you peace in uncertain times, strength when the road feels heavy, and the wisdom to recognize miracles, even when they arrive softly. Amen.